I don't like sports. Actually, let me rephrase that. I've never been interested in sports, like at all. Without straight up doxing myself, I will say that I was born in and spent a good chunk of my childhood in a place that cares way too much about college football. In fact, I'd say that most of my family probably cares about college football more than they care about me. I'm only mostly kidding. See, the thing about sports is that you either really care about them or you really don't. And those that care about them usually really care about them. And those that don't only care to whatever extent they're externally exposed to. Here's an example. Viewer. Yes, you, the person watching this video. What's your favorite sports team? Like, of all time? Go ahead, say it out loud. Don't worry, I'll give you a second. Wow, that's my favorite team too! I'm just kidding. So I'd say that there's a good 50-50 chance that some of you immediately had a team pop right into your head, but I imagine some of you completely drew a blank. I would personally fall into the latter group. I just don't care enough about sports. So why is it that sports video games are so damn fun? You've got skateboarding, you've got football, you've got snowboarding, you've got other football, you've got, car football. You see, there's playing a sport and then there's playing as someone else who plays the sport. It's the most interactive way to interact with sports without actually having to interact with sports. There's so many different kinds of sports games, and while some of them are realistic simulation games, others are straight up wacky takes on sports or even made up sports entirely. Let's take a minute here and look at why I find these games so fun, and I think the best way to do that is to talk about a few. Let's start with the first thing I mentioned, skateboarding games. There are two big skateboarding series that I enjoy, and those are the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series and the Skate series. Both are really different in style, but still incredibly fun in their own ways. The Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series is all about linking up combos and pulling off tons of really technical moves using a button input system. Riding a skateboard all around these industrial playground maps using famous pro skaters is a ton of fun, and there's all kinds of challenges and a great sense of direction. This game is fun for me because, well, yeah, it's about skateboarding. You're just trying to get a high score. I don't think this is any different from trying to learn combos in a fighting game or running scrims in a competitive multiplayer game. It's just fun. You've got to learn to master the game mechanics, something I clearly haven't done, and I have never had this much fun on an actual skateboard. But of course, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater is mostly grounded in realism, at least mechanically. Then you've got Skate, which on the surface looks similar, but... This game's more about open exploration and experimentation rather than just linking up a bunch of combos and finding hidden stuff. Here, a lot of the gameplay is more about taking advantage of the game's physics and how the world works around you. The game embraces that though and includes entire challenges around just destroying your character by breaking all their bones. Seriously, this game has some insanely good sound design because, For someone like me who really just doesn't care all that much about skateboarding, this game is completely unapologetically fun because, really, there's just so much more to do than skateboarding. Of course, the skateboarding itself still feels really good. All of the main moves are tied to flicking the right stick in different directions to pull off different moves, and it feels super fluid to play. It's also a lot more forgiving than the Tony Hawk games, though that might be seen as a negative depending on who you ask. But these are solo sports games where you're just kind of doing cool tricks and stuff. How about team sports? Let's start with FIFA football. Let's start with FIFA soccer. Just pretend I said the one that you like more. These games, pretty fun. Like, listen, this is meant to be a pretty realistic simulation of how the sport is meant to be played. Ignoring any dumb monetization practices, these games are super fun at their core, especially if you're someone like me who intentionally plays them wrong. Now, I'm sure you're wondering how I could possibly play a game like FIFA wrong.
On the back of that particular challenge, will the referee let the matter rest there? So we have an early booking here to report, Stuart.
Yeah, and I think the referee's absolutely right. He's just making it clear to all the players out there, he's not going to take any...
So listen, for people like me who know very little about sports, let me explain cards to you in a super basic way. Let's say you're trying to kick a soccer ball down the field, you know, like a soccer player would. Then you pass the ball to another player so that they can push it down the field. Now imagine that someone on the other team, rather than going for the ball, instead just slide tackles you for absolutely no reason whatsoever, repeatedly. That, my friends, leads to fouls, and that specific behavior, at least in the FIFA games, gets you a yellow card for each offense. A yellow card stays on your record for the whole game on a per-player basis. Now let's say you, a high IQ individual with a yellow card, intentionally slide tackle the player who has control of the ball again, on purpose. This leads to another yellow card, right? Well, in the FIFA games, a foul with a yellow card turns that yellow card into a red card, which means that the carded player is ejected from the game. Now, in a lot of sports, you can just sub someone in to replace the person who was ejected. Not in soccer, though. In soccer, if you have an ejection and you lose someone, you lose someone. They're gone. You cannot replace them. When I play these games, my goal 90% of the time is to try to get as many players ejected as fast as I possibly can. Once enough players are ejected, you automatically have to forfeit the game. It's almost like a reverse speedrun challenge for me. Would everyone find playing like this fun? I don't know, but I do. Of course, playing the game properly is still kind of fun, but as someone who, again, doesn't really care about sports, I find this way more fun. I'm not here to play this game competitively or anything, it's a video game. I'm here to have fun. Now, of course, I have to talk about the company that publishes sports games that seem almost entirely geared toward people who don't really care about sports, and that is Nintendo. Nintendo, and by extension the companies who make the sports games that Nintendo publish, have the ability to make a sports game that seems appealing to people who literally know nothing about the sport. Like, listen, I spent $60 on a golf game last year. Yeah, it's Mario Golf, but the fact that I did that is still wild. Nintendo's sports games date all the way back to the days of the NES back in the 80s when they were just making things like
golf, tennis, volleyball, soccer. By the way, have you ever tried F-Zero Maximum Velocity?
Nowadays, they still make sports games, but they slide Mario onto it, you know, and it sells like hotcakes. Let's look at Mario Golf Super Rush. Like, yeah, this is a golf game, but it's a golf game where I can use a little mushroom guy or a green dinosaur. Look at him go! And on top of all of that, all the characters have different special abilities, and you can chase after your ball in a competitive game of, speed golf? Alright, so I know that I've talked about a range of sports here, including realistic simulation sports and stylized cartoon sports, but what about fake sports? I think the most popular current example of fake sports would be the supersonic acrobatic rocket-powered battle cars, or more eloquently, Rocket League. Rocket League is a game that I've been playing off and on since day one. Quick backstory, this game was free on PlayStation Plus, and when it came out, I hated it. I just did not enjoy it at all. But then a couple of years later, a friend convinced me to try it again, and I was hooked. This game's ridiculous. It's like soccer, but you're pushing the ball around with customizable rocket-powered Hot Wheels that can fly. You might ask, why would I play this car soccer game over just, you know, soccer? Well, let me tell you, this game gives you complete freedom to suck. Or play well, I guess, if that's the kind of thing you're into. You have complete freedom of movement of your rocket car, and it feels good. It's just incredibly responsive. You can choose when to tactically boost, and you can even make micro adjustments on the fly when you're trying to orient yourself after a totally failed aerial hit. This game is the premier fake sports game in my opinion, and the higher level players are absolutely insane with their skills and control. This actually leads to a very interesting side topic. This game's what I consider a blend of fake sport, but also falls into kind of a newer phenomenon called the e-sport. While some consider esports to not be real sports, I think it counts. While in this video I am talking about games based on what most people would consider traditional athletics, esports aren't anything to scoff at. Some games have such a high skill ceiling, watching pros play feels like watching superhumans play. It seems like a totally different game. Be it insane dexterity like in a game of Rocket League to control your car as you maneuver the ball into the opponent's goal, or watching Valorant pros get insanely mad flicks in fractions of a second. Not only are these games fun and approachable for people like me who aren't athletically inclined, they're still fun to watch at the highest levels. There's a reason ESPN, known for traditional sports, sometimes shows stuff like Street Fighter tournaments. Now, none of this is to say that traditional athletic sports are worse than esports, don't get me wrong, that's not the argument I'm making here. I'm just saying that I prefer the digital interactive version of these kinds of sports, and I'll bet that I'm not alone in feeling that way. But I've gotten way off track. Let's say you're not not interested in these ridiculous acrobatic battle cars. You want a fake sport that feels like a real sport. Well, I've got you covered. There's this game that came out over 20 years ago that's actually a sports game with this cool RPG side quest. That game is called Final Fantasy X, and the sport I'm talking about? Blitzball, baby! The best way that I can describe Blitzball is that it's like underwater rugby. Now, for the record, I'm saying this having no idea how rugby works, and after a quick Google search, it turns out that underwater rugby actually exists already? Anyways, in Blitzball, the goal is to get the Blitzball into the opponent's goal. In Final Fantasy X, you actually build up your team and make them learn cool skills to progress through the league. Sounds like normal sports ball, except in this game, you have special skills like draining your opponent's life force or poisoning them. Blitzball, in my opinion, isn't the most complicated sport, but oh boy, it can lead to some really infuriating moments, especially when it crashes. Weirdly enough, out of all the games that I've mentioned so far, this one's probably the closest you can get to just a strict sports gameplay with not as much player control. Oh, and did I mention that Blitzball is canon in Star Wars now? Anyways, I mentioned real sports, I mentioned fake sports, but I also want to mention fake real sports. Are you a fan of fantasy football? No, not that kind of fantasy football, I mean fantasy football. Blood Bowl is a video game based off of a board game based off of another board game, but we're not going to focus on the board game today. This game is American football, but with a bunch of crazy races from the Warhammer universe. Now, this is not like your standard Madden football game where you pick a play and roll with it, strategizing the best offensive push to get to the end zone. This is more like a strategy game where everything really just depends on a dice roll at the end of the day. Stuff like moving units can provoke enemy adjacent units, which can lead to your units getting absolutely wrecked. In fact, there's a ton of violence in this game. Honestly, this is super unrealistic. They would never hurt each other in real football. Listen, I think the point I'm trying to make here is that even if you don't enjoy sports games can be a lot of fun. This is especially true in games that give you the agency to make your own fun. This is kind of a call to action for those like me who don't care about sports but don't really play sports games. I ask you this, try a sports game. Just give it a shot. It can be a real sports game, a fake real sports game, fantasy football, or whatever else seems like a good time to you. I know it can be kind of expensive to just go buy a bunch of games you might not be interested in, but if you have something like, I don't know, Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, they are not sponsoring me, but Xbox, Microsoft, it would be super nice, you can actually access EA Play, which gives you a bunch of EA sports games including FIFA, Madden, NHL, UFC, and more. Rocket League is a completely free game on every platform. The next Skate game is also going to be free when it comes out. Anyways, I know this video has been a bit different than what you're used to, and if you've watched this far, I really appreciate you, and I hope it was entertaining. Before I go though, I do want to thank my patrons, including Melancholis in the Omega Gamer tier, and Brandon Wolf, Megan Soulcup, and That's Just Ash in the Played Every Game tier, along with these absolutely legendary people you see on the screen here. Thank you all so much. Your support means the world to me. And speaking of thanks, thank you for watching this video. I'm still working on the next I Played Every Game video, so keep an eye out. This one's gonna be one that I think you guys will like. I do plan to make more videos like this though, assuming you don't all hate it with a passion. Anyways, thank you so much, and as always, have a fantastic day.